So we'll start off with the prayer. Apyayantu mamangani vak pranashchakshutram ato balam indriyani cha sarvani. May my limbs grow vigorous, my speech, breath, eye, ear, as also my strength and all my senses. Sarvam Brahmopanishad Maham Brahma Nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakaro Anirakaram Astu Anirakaranam Mestu. May all this is Brahman, and it is the Brahman espoused by the Upanishads. May we never discard this Brahman, and may that Brahman never discard me. May there be no mutual discarding. May there be no mutual discarding. Tadatmani nirate ya upanishatsu dharmaste mani santu om shanti shanti shanti. And let those truths which are set forth in these Upanishads live in me, dedicated to the self. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So today we're going to commence further study the Upanishads by studying the Kena Upanishad, selected because of its brevity. And so the subject matters I have put on the board, and I hope all of you can see. So we'll just go through them one by one, what they mean, and what is the background to this Kena Upanishad. As is suggested, the first word of this Upanishad is Kena, by whom? It's a question. And just as we'll make this interactive because it's an informal study. It is not a talk, although sometimes it ends up like that. I hope that it is much more interactive than that. So if you have a question or any kind of comment, feel free to put it in the chat or even unmute yourself and feel free to interrupt. But the first word of this Upanishad is Kena. It's an inquiry. And just as we do in this informal study, I encourage questions and answers. That is the old way of understanding and learning. But questions only come up if you are interested in the questions, the subject matter of the questions. We were discussing earlier that people generally will have interests in certain specified fields. Naturally, our biological nature makes us interested in the genetic directives with which we are given. Namely, an urge to continue and propagate the species. In other words, if you acknowledge there's a creation, a continuation of that creation. That's the first urge that all creatures have. And then the second urge, and the whole universe, by the way, is seen to have this, if we understand it correctly. That means the whole universe is alive, if this is the case. And then the second biological interest we have is what we might call streaming negative entropy on ourselves. Entropy is a measure of scrambledness and chaos. And so when we stream things in a more complex way, in a more orderly way, in a way that we can systematically live, when we do this, this is streaming negative entropy. The mystic Ramakrishna Paramahansa put it in two ways. He put it very simply and very humorously as symbols of lust and greed, woman and gold. Or if it was to women, it would be men and gold. So this is an indication of our key genetic interests. And for us to engage in these interests, the world has to be look in a certain way. and we have to assume that we are doing everything. But this first fundamental question in these Upanishads takes a different approach. And to even suggest a different approach means I have to look away from the genetic programming that I take for granted. And I have to look at things in a different way, question things in a different way. Because whichever way I look, when I examine it properly, I realize that the commonly understood I is not the agent of anything. I'll give you an example. Supposing I'm a fireman and I'm trying to put a fire out, and somebody asks me at the end of my business, what did you do? And I say, I put the fire out. Unfortunately, the questioner is a philosopher. And the questioner now asks the secondary question, are you sure you put the fire out, or did the water do it? Well, the real answer is the water did it. What was your role in it? I simply held it this way and that way. So in a sense, the real agency was the water, not you. I'll give another example. I baked a cake, supposing you say that. Unfortunately, you declare this to a philosopher who then says, now wait, you baked it or the electricity did it? You put it in an oven and the oven itself and the heat generated from it did it. You didn't go like this and generate heat. What was your part in it? I simply took the ingredients, mixed it, but the lion's share was done by the oven itself. Electrical current did it. I like eating. Supposing you declare this. You like eating? Eating what? My food with my body. Unfortunately, you're talking to a scientist, philosopher, who says, are you sure? Or are you simply using borrowed energy from the sun? Is it not all the sun's energy? The magic of this photosynthesis employed by plants, they know how to capture all the energy of the sun, and they know how to, through the magic of chlorophyll, convert this into an energy. They borrow all of this, and hydrogen is also acquired, and oxygen is also acquired, and the carbon is also acquired. And then we munch and crunch on the products of this, carbohydrates, and give back all the carbon dioxide. And so it continues. Without the plant doing this, nothing happens. Without the sun doing this, nothing happens. We're all running around on bottled sunshine. So it questions really, are we really the agency when we think of ourselves in an individual way as an independent entity, exercising our human rights and human freedom? So it looks different when you go deeper into these questions. And most people, if they take it for granted that all these things happen by themselves, and I myself am doing it, and I'm working hard, and I'm getting exhausted, and life is unfair to me, and I put myself as the center of the entire universe, then clearly things are being misplaced. I'm not interpreting life in the correct way. And then there's an identification with mental movements too. I think this, I think that. My opinion on this is this. My opinion on that is that. Then the same mistake is being made because there's a steady current being supplied at the mental substation that I laughingly call my mind. And the use of that, then, I declare to be mine, ignoring the whole current behind it. So there's a significant question that comes up, Kena, after which this Upanishad is named. So the first subject which we find there is this question: who is the real agent? Beyond the thing that I assumed was the agent, who is the real agent? And then the answer comes Brahman. But what is this Brahman? Why should it be some agency? Because in other places, Brahman is described as not moving, the unmoving one, the unchanging one, the undivided one, the infinite one. How can this be the real agent? And then the next thing deals with the paradox. Because we're dealing with a subtle subject, the thing that we assume to know is not actually what it is. It was Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of State, who made this wonderfully philosophical and puzzling and mystical kind of statement. It says, there are some things, some known things which are unknown, and some unknowns which are known. And the whole of the press corps listening to this was scratching their head, trying to puzzle it out. And then it was big headlines. This is a very complex statement. And very often, the Upanishads and other literature, particularly Buddhist literature that comes out really as koans, put things in a negative, a double negative way, and highlight the paradox of the subtlety of knowing something objectively and subjectively. The real knowing, the real unknowing, that is discussed. And then an allegory is put with these Upanishads to endorse what is the real agency, and then what is knowledge at the end of the day. And finally, the sixth subject of this Upanishad comes out. It discusses Brahman on a cosmic level and an individual level. So there are 6 subjects, really. But all of it is to do, as all Upanishads are to do, with the central unity, the central entity that is described as Brahman. All right, there's a brief overview of this Kena Upanishad, orientated around the question. Now, if we take up now, and many of you, having an interest in the Upanishads, have acquired the 8 Upanishads in 2 volumes, 4 Upanishads in part 1, 4 Upanishads in part 2. You can follow it here. Yeah. And so there is an introduction by the commentator, some of which is worth studying. We have to be careful not to get bogged down too much in the commentary, because much of this is for students who are looking at every single part of the word. We can also study it, but we can take it for granted that the etymology of words has been figured out for us. Anyway, this Upanishad begins with this commentary. It mentions that it is part and parcel of a much bigger work, because all Upanishads are appended to the Vedas. And this one is appended to the Sama Veda. And so things are dealt with in all the Vedas. A ritualistic portion is dealt with, as well as a portion to do with principles about this world. And when we say this world, we're talking about the things we cannot see as well, the world of subtlety. Now, we don't have to go very far to find a world of subtlety. So before we sat here to engage in this study, there's a group of devotees here, or a group, 3 of us. We were studying the effects, in a sense, of electromagnetism in the body. And we were seeing that it is more than something confined to the body, because the electromagnetic field is present everywhere. If we want to tune into our radio broadcast, we don't necessarily have to go to the broadcasting station in Dublin. There's a broadcasting station of the main national broadcaster called RTE, I think I should say OTE, and that is based in Stillorgan. We don't have to go to Stillorgan to catch a broadcast. Where you sit now, provided you have sufficient equipment, that is a transistor, a certain radio unit, you have the will to exercise your control on it, to turn it on and tune it properly. And you don't have to go anywhere, because there's a permitting, all penetrating thing called the electromagnetic wave system. It's an electromagnetic field. And previously, in the history of science, electricity was an energy distinct from magnetism, and it was nicely combined into electromagnetism. It gives us a lesson. We get closer to an understanding of things when things are simplified and unified. And so every question really that comes up in the Upanishads to do with this Brahman is to find out, can we get from this complexity, this pluralism, this dividedness, to a single generalized principle? And by knowing that, we can know everything. The question in the Upanishads themselves. What is that? By knowing which, we can know everything. Kasmin no bhava vijnati. What is that? By knowing which, we can know everything. Just as if we know clay, we can know every object made from clay. If we know gold, we know every object made from gold. There's no such thing as gold and the ring. Gold is the ring. Gold is in the form of the ring. The form may change. And so this world has these dimensions to it: name and form and substance. What is the substance? Now, this is the search in all levels of truth, including scientific truth. What is the single unified thing that we can get to? When we understand it, we can understand it everywhere. And so there is a ritualistic portion which is to do with this world and with the next world. We can equate to the world of the physicality of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis, and a speculation about other things, but it's still physical, it's still material. It's still to do with space and time and energy and matter. And then there's another way, and that is just to engage in the cultural occupations of pure thinking. I can entertain the mind in a curious way and understand the principles, but it's not really getting me closer to this fundamental question: what is this substance underlying everything? It is simply giving me an intellectual understanding of it. The real inquiry in all these Upanishads requires some qualities, and the qualities are enunciated very clearly. There has to be a strong desire for freedom and truth. And supposing you are a devotee of God, it transmutes into the same thing. It has to be a thirst for God, a thirst for a real experience, a real connection, ultimately a nearness that equates to oneness at the end of the day with that thing. We really know something when we are one with it. And then in order to get that kind of thirst expressed, there has to be a steadiness. It's not just a random thing, an enthusiasm one day, it's gone the next. It has to be steady. And then there has to be a purity of mind, because our whole misunderstanding, why we want knowledge in the first place, is because some obstacle is in the way that sees things and experiences things and interprets it in such a way that we sustain the two genetic directives I've just described. Seeing things in this way, my interest only lies in that, by discipline, and also acquired by getting this knowledge from a competent teacher. All of this is required and is taken for granted that we are all studying these Upanishads with these qualities in mind. So the introduction of the Kena Upanishad says, since this Upanishad commencing with this term, Kineshitam, and revealing the Supreme Brahman, has to be spoken of, the 9th chapter, that means referring to its progression in the Sam Veda, begins. Earlier than this, in these Vedas, the rites concerned with all the things I've just mentioned have been exhaustively dealt with. And the different meditations, these are things that are meditated on, not just taken in a superficial way, on the vital force as the basis of rites, as also the meditations on the various samas. The footnote says a sama is a song, and it's divided into parts, 5 or 7. And this sama has also, each of its parts has to be taught or thought of in different ways. And if we go to chapter 1 and chapter 2 of this Samaveda, we'll understand what that means. But our concern is not like this, and our Upanishad is not concerned like this. We're going on to another aspect. So, after that is stated the meditation on the Gayatra Sama, the thought of as vital force. Why should we think of things in these terms? And what does it mean to say vital force? It is that energy that expresses itself as sentiency. Sentiency, and the original question really is to do with the sentiency. What is required for sentiency? Therefore, it's worth studying. And of course, it ends with a succession of teachers and pupils, which relates to effects of action. But if all of these rites and meditations as enjoined are properly observed, they become the cause for the purification of the mind. This is the one condition we mentioned. And this purification of the mind means that we are free from desires. What do we mean by desires? One desire remaining, a desire of thirst, a longing for understanding truth and freedom. But all these other desires are for our objects. These are the desires that are in the way and therefore require controlling. What is a desire? A desire is an internal feeling of some void in me that has to be fulfilled from the outside. And it is not necessarily to do with objective desires because it is stimulated by an internal desire to sustain my own egoistic status quo. Every desire, say for wealth, is really orientated toward sustaining my vision or my understanding of myself, a psychophysical self. This is called egoism. That's where it stems from. And so, in the case of one who cherishes desires and has no enlightenment, that is, gets bogged down really with the superficial things of this world, and it says that is meditation on or knowledge of the various evolutionary forces expressed in this world, the energetic expression that we call philosophically tanmatras, interpreted here as devas or deities or shining ones. The rites by themselves are enjoined in the Vedas and in the minor scriptures called smritis. They become the cause for the attainment not of the highest thing, but the southern path, the path where rewards are given. And we discussed this in previous discussions of the Upanishad. They return to this world of humans. In other words, our journey continues because we never got to the end of it. We never found our ultimate fulfillment. But through activity prompted by natural impulses that are repugnant to the scriptures, if you take that line, then they degrade into lower beings, subhuman beings, ranging from beasts to the life forms of vegetation, trees, etc. And that's fully in accordance with all the Vedic texts about two routes of progression after this body falls, northern and southern, and this we discussed in the previous Upanishad. And if you don't do either, if you're simply a materialist, then the rewards will be material. And so we have minor orders of organic life, mosquitoes and other things like that. And they are constantly subject to birth and death. And this follows a divine order of things. that gives everybody an opportunity, and all the forms are working in harmony. We call this ecology. You may not know what the purpose of a mosquito is, but when you study it in the light of in the ecological life of the planet, then there may be an understanding about it. So it goes on like that. It tells us all of these things. In the Upanishad, it quotes, beginning with Kenishitam, and in the Upanishad, it said, the self-existent Lord destroyed the outgoing senses. Therefore, one sees the outer things and not the self within. This is leading up to the purport. Why is there a Upanishad at all that makes this inquiry? A rare discriminating person, desiring only one thing, immortality, turned his eyes away from the outside to the inside and saw the indwelling self. As time goes on, we'll discuss these various passages dotted in every place. So there has to be a longing for the knowledge of the indwelling self arising so that these questions will naturally arise. And an essential component to this would be, as it is said, having examined the worlds attained by work, that is, any action that is done for a result, the unproduced, the everlasting emancipation of freedom that we are looking for is not produced by these material activities. And so the one who wants this fundamental truth about Brahman, that is the Brahmana, should resort to renunciation. In studying the Bhagavad Gita, we understand what this term means, renunciation. It means detaching your desires for the outside world as revealed by the senses and attaching to the higher values, attaching to the inwardness of things. So in order to know that fully, what is required? A desire being there, a feeling of the fact that the answers, the eternal answers, not found on the outside, with a longing to reveal what is there. What should we do? We have to approach a teacher. The traditional way is to approach the teacher with sacrificial faggots in hand, representing, please light my knowledge. And this is well established in Mundaka Upanishad and various other texts. And in this way alone does a person of detachment, already acquired, acquire the competence for what? For knowledge? No, for hearing about it. For having the capacity to contemplate on it, and then to realize the knowledge of the indwelling self through meditation. So besides, as a result of this realization of the indwelling self as Brahman, there comes a total cessation of the main obstacle that we have, and that is ignorance. A misinterpretation, a misunderstanding of the world, necessary for us to sustain our genetic component, our genetic conditioning. Our genetics says one thing. When you say something like, this world is only an approximation of what is, that this world is actually a kind of deception, that what we see and feel and touch and taste is only relative to the sense organs and not anywhere else. Producing a science of relativity, which was there even long ago, but put into modern science in the form of special relativity, general relativity, understanding there's no fixed position. Wherever you stand produces a different interpretation of what is. And the sense organs only gives you 5 combined interpretations, supplemented by a 6th called the mind. So can we get a different perspective of this? These steps are necessary. And besides, as a result of this realization of the indwelling self as Brahman, when we discover this indwelling self, we have discovered the self, fundamental self of entire existence, the entire universe. There's only one thing. Then there comes this total cessation of ignorance, and ignorance is the seed of bondage. Where does our sense of restriction come from? Our sense of limitation, our sense of inadequacy. It all comes from this one mother of all obstacles, ignorance. This one klesha, this one obstacle. And so what sorrow? What is the practical result? Upanishad that we have just studied declares this. What sorrow and what delusion can there be for that sphere of oneness? There's no second to fear, no second to combat, no second to acquire, no second to dominate, and no second, therefore, no grief, no reaction. We get rid of our sorrow, therefore. This is the practical implication. What use is all this philosophy? There it is. And also in accordance with the Vedic texts, the knower of the self transcends sorrow, Chandogya Upanishad will tell us. And when the one that is both cause and effect is seen, the knots of the heart of the seer are cut, and all of his doubts are resolved, and all karma is consumed. Now, these objections come up, which we won't deal with, because they're to do with interpretation, and we're quite confident of the interpretation that is given by Shankaracharya here. So we are not interested necessarily in the dialectics of this. We really want to get to the substance of this Upanishad. Therefore, it says, this desire to know the indwelling self in the case of a man who has renounced all seen and unseen results, not renounced the world, renounced the results, attainable by external means, such as religious rites, such as doing activities to get results, is being shown by the Vedic text beginning with this kineshitam, but the object of the inquiry being subtle, not obvious. The presentation in the form of questions and answers of the student and teacher leads to easy comprehension. That is why in all of these things, apart from this introduction, we want some kind of interactivity that involves questions and answers. And it also shows that the object is not realizable through mere dialectics. We're not interested in the dialectics of it. Moreover, the dialectics, of course, is all in the intellect. We want the actual thing, not the discussion about it. Moreover, in accordance with the Vedic text, this knowledge is not attainable through dialectics, the Katha Upanishad, and the obligation about taking a teacher implied in the Vedic and Smriti texts, one who has a teacher knows. Such knowledge alone is acquired from a teacher becomes the best. Learn that through, and the Bhagavad Gita, the 4th chapter, gives us through obeisance. Obeisance, bowing to the teacher. Bowing, not just a physical act, but a surrender to the teacher also. Let me humbly accept what you have to deliver with all faith and confidence. Faith in myself, in my capacity to explore this dimension of myself called the eternal self. Faith in the scripture, and faith in the teacher, and faith in God. So it can be imagined that someone, having found no refuge in anything other than the indwelling self and having a longing for the fearless, eternal, auspicious, unshakable, that is the Brahman, approached a teacher who is established in Brahman and asks this first question: willed by whom does the directed mind go towards its object? Being directed by whom does the vital force that precedes all proceed toward its goal or its duty? And by whom is this speech willed that people utter, who is the effulgent being who directs the eyes and the ears. Let us explore this most profound question. Kenishitam patati preshitam manaha kena pranaha pratamaha praiti yuktaha. By whom is all this directed? Okay. So the questions put in this verse by the pupil imply that passing things of experience are not at all, and they depend on a permanent reality. It's taken for granted. Otherwise, the question wouldn't arise. It bypasses this misunderstanding, I am doing everything. My favorite question, as you know, to small children and even to adults, actually, adults are big children, of course, is who digests your food? And sometimes, without thinking too much about it, people say, oh, I do. Even children will say, oh, I do. With children, you can ask if they understand. Well, when you were approximately 1 year old or something, there was no sense of self-consciousness, self-awareness. And so who digested your food then? You can't say, I did it. Something is digesting your food for you. What is that? It's quite clear you didn't put food into this entrance and follow it up with a big spoon and give it a stir in the stomach. Nobody does that. You have no business in it. You simply consciously put the food in and leave it at that with no awareness, where did this food come from? Today, if you ask somebody, where does the food come from? They might say it comes from supermarket, a supermarket somewhere. But you see, the inquiry isn't deep enough. Supposing you have a group of children, you may have heard this from me before, this happened, you say to a group of children, tomorrow I'm going to bring you a cake that already generates excitement. And then the query comes, if you bring a cake and we had 30 people in a class, how will we share this cake so we'll all enjoy it? Then you say, now there's a special cake. This cake was made by 100 people. Now they're excited. They're visualizing a cake. You can hardly fit through the door. And your imagination gets extended and say, a Guinness Book of Records cake. Maybe the biggest cake in the world, 100 people. And then when you come the next day, you bring a cake, a standard size cake. And the great disappointment, we thought you'd bring a huge cake. Still enough to go around. But then how is it that 100 people made the cake? Did you consider us involved? Where did your cake come from? Now, supposing it is a domestically baked cake, you can't say only one person was involved. Because if you track the history, just the earthly history of it, you have to say that somebody planted wheat seeds somewhere. And somebody then made an irrigation system. And then, regardless of the conditions around it, we'll deal with that later, but there have to have people who harvest it at the right time. And then people who extract the wheat section of it, the grain section, the granular section, and sort out the wheat from the chaff. And then it has to be ground. In the old days, water mills were used to circulate a big grinding stone, and the millet was ground. And then it was ground suitably to bag or package, and then it was delivered off to a bakery. And then the baker then combined it with other ingredients, sugar and various other things. Now we haven't explored who made the sugar, where that came from. And it wasn't in Ireland. That sugar probably came from Trinidad or somewhere, some other part of the globe. And then baking powder was necessary. So labor was necessary, probably a factory system, or one person kneading the dough, adding things, and then finally put into the oven. Is that the end of the story? No, it's taken out and it's packaged. And then the delivery truck has to be there, transport system. in the end, it's much more than 100 people. Now, forget about the people, there are other ingredients to it. Without the sun, nothing happens. Without rainfall, nothing happens. Without the earth, nothing happens. In fact, when you trace its history, the entire universe made this cake. If you think that all the elemental ingredients just were here on earth always, you'll be mistaken. You track their history, it came from the belly of exploding stars. It came from supernova. Nuclear synthesis occurred there from simple hydrogen and the lighter elements, and then through gravity, through falling, the principle of falling in the belly of stars. These other things were put in a kind of crucible, if you will, and came out as the heavier elements, the carbon, the oxygen, and all the other things, and came out eventually as the most stupid stuff in the universe called iron that cannot do anything. It cannot change into anything. It doesn't go anywhere. So this whole progression takes place. And according to modern science, some 13.7, 13.8 billion years were required for it, if you take that model. So these questions can have huge complexities to them in terms of answers. So don't think that you're doing anything. You are not really the agency when you take for granted, I, this individual, with a certain peculiar way of behaving called personality, and a certain physical characteristic called body. No, it's not like that. This question has more subtle implications. So let us see. More subtle than the physical then will be the mind. The mind is a field that can be observed, and we can see all kinds of activities going on in it. And it's a good question that when we take the mind and give some orderliness to it, we have this thing called will, it seems to be, where we have a deterministic faculty and we can direct our attention as we want. You're doing it now as we speak. And it can be easily redirected. While you're listening to this, a cat can be walking in and purring and rubbing against your leg, and you start stroking it, and immediately your attention is there. And then by the time you come back to the talk, you think, what did I miss? I missed some words here and there. Well, where was your attention? Well, the pleasing look and the purring on the cat tells you where your attention is. To the cat. So it's a legitimate question. Something wills something to move. And the mind is the obvious example of this movement, because so much movement takes place in the mind. You can be sitting physically still, but there's movement in this field, the mental field. The mind is going here and there and everywhere. The attention is something like a light. It alights on an object. It has the ability to be taken hold of and steered at your choosing. Who is the one who chooses it? Who is the one who directs it? This is really the fundamental question. All right. The next then is, by whom commanded? You can put it this way. Being directed by whom? Interpretation of prana is vital force, but all force is vital. And force, of course, is an antiquated term for energy. Force is Newton's idea, and there's a formula to do with that. So, who makes something move? What is the thing that energizes something, that puts work into something? There are very few people who can define energy. We have a peculiar way of defining energy. Energy is that dynamic expression through space and time of that one absolute. The absolute never moves, but its expression when you add space and time is movement. No scientist will really be able to define energy except by its effects. And so that energy is given to us as gravitational energy, the strong and weak nuclear forces, electrical energy is also there. So there are various energies which are described. We can also add the stubbornness of inertia. You can look at it this way. If you want a car to move, some effort has to be made because it doesn't want to move. The car just wants to sit. And so you have to apply some energy to it and it moves. Having made it move, it doesn't really want to stop. So why do things want to move? Why do things have inertia and not want to go in the first place? And why do books fall onto the floor? These are the important questions. Gravity we know, and has been interpreted in different ways. The equivalence principle, Einstein is there, where acceleration and gravity are seen to be equivalent. That's fine. But what are the gravitational waves that move through the gravitational field called space? What are they? If you're a particle physicist, you'll want them to be gravitons. But really, when you look at them closely, they all dissolve and disappear. It is only because of the fabric of space and time that we're able to see things in an individuated way. So we can put it like this in a different phrase. By whom or commanded by whom does life, movement, energy, or where does this first thing, this primordial thing called energy, because there's no matter, there's only energy. The only thing that makes something heavy is energy. This is not my own idea. This is the idea of these ancients by putting it as a primordial thing. These ancients did it, but Einstein also did it in that famous E equals M equation. That the only thing that makes something heavy is the energy you put into it. There's only energy there. But whose energy is it? And at whose will do people utter this speech? When you voluntarily or involuntarily say something, then who's directing it? What is enabling this speech? It is said that humans learn to speak by living on an island in the middle of a sea. There's a theory put forward by somebody called Elaine Morgan called the aquatic ape. And it's just as good a theory as the savannah theory of anthropology. The theory is we lost all our ape-like characteristics of hair and so on and so forth because we lived by the water, in the water, and the only form of our sustenance was omega that made the ideal nutrient for the growth of a human brain. And we learned to communicate, and we learned to make a mutation called FOXP2 because we had to communicate, and therefore speech was born. So speech is the only way we can communicate. Even when we think in speech. And so who wills this? Who constructs dialogues and sentences and talks? And the inference, of course, is leading up to a central point. It must be only one entity that's doing this. And then who is this effulgent being? We know that things shine, but who, and there's a cause for it, but what is the uncaused entity that sits there and lends its light to other things? Who is the effulgent one? It's a self-effulgent one, the one that shines. That is, that lends its light, its intelligence, its consciousness at the end of the day. What is that entity that prompts the eyes and the ears? The eyes reveal colors and forms. It is through light, capturing of light, and that photons hit the retina, and then the various components there will determine what colors we should be seeing. But we are using light and we're reflecting that back, and the mind is interpreting that in a certain way. Who's the one who does all of this? And when we hear, it is not just a question of we hear, a number of preceding steps are there. There has to be a vibration, and that vibration has to be carried through at a certain frequency, and the air itself will carry it. And it comes, and so it starts off as an electromagnetic vibration, and then the air itself will carry it. It arrives at the instrument of the air, and there's a certain vibrating drum there, which responds to that particular frequency, and that gets carried through the nervous system and gets interpreted from one's experience, is identified, this is the sound, this is the pitch, this is the tone, this is the frequency, this is the wavelength. All of that happening in a split second. We don't bother to examine that. Who is the one that does it? So the necessity of a ground for the existence of the finite, we assume here as something that is infinite. And all these questions are assuming that there's a relation between the reality and these phenomena. What we distinguish between the reality and the phenomena is a realm of experiences. There must be some experiencer that doesn't change, because the definition of reality is something that doesn't move, something that doesn't change. In other words, something that has no connection in itself with space and time and causation. What is energy? What is the world? What is all of this existence? It is simply this one existence that we call Brahman, as seen through space, time, and causation, says Swami Vivekananda. And we are also understanding that if there is this real fundamental substratum called Brahman, that is not only the source and ground of this experience, but it also governs it. So this question is asked. I'm looking at the time, we only have a few minutes to go, so I'm going to leave that there at the first stanza, giving something of an overview to this question. And of course, the simple answer to this question we can put in one word, but we'll explore this more next time, because the answer is a curious answer, and the answer itself is challenged. Shrutasya srutam manoso mano yad vacho ha vacham sa u pranasya pranaha. Because, in other words, the answer the teacher gives is not, it is this. It is also saying, giving a reason why I'm saying it. It is because it is that which is, and a beautiful phrase, it is the air of the ear. What a wonderful, wonderful subject for meditation. It is the mind of the mind. It is the speech, indeed, of the speech. It is the breath of the breath. It is the eye of the eye. And so these wise people who understand this will automatically give up any wrong notions of self-sufficiency, that I'm doing anything. And when they, with this understanding, depart from the world, they become immortal. The phrase is awkward, because I am immortal anyway. So it is just a phrase of convenience to say become. So I realize my own immortality. So since that one is the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, the life of the life, the eye of the eye, for that reason, wise people, people with real intelligence, intelligent people, after giving up the self-identification with the senses, the body, the mind also is a sense, and renouncing this world, not seeing the importance of trying to fulfill ourselves through it.
Maybe I've got this wrong, but does this imply then that people's misidentification, with their senses, with their body, with their mind, that the effulgence, the energy, the sentience itself of the illusion is grounded in the so that there's a sense of play built in from the get-go, because my mistaken self-identity with my body, mind, or whatever personal history, that is energized by the divinity itself. So therefore, in a way, I'm a play. Even my misidentification, there's something sort of comical about it or humorous about it.
Well, that's exactly that. That's not found here necessarily, but certainly we can view, you see, all of these things we can see are like waves. See, if we try to understand what is energy, energy is something that is a dynamic thing, but it can also be potential and expresses itself in different ways. So if we view these basic things, this really comes to a passage in the Ashtavakra Samhita that I've quoted before, which says, once you understand the wave-like nature of nature itself that expresses itself and comes to our understanding as eyes and ears and body and matter and people and objects and bubble gum and teenagers that chew it, when we see the world in this way, then you see that it is all a manifestation of waves, something like waves in an ocean that have different configurations, and where our view of it is only the tiniest superficial element of it. So the clue to that was in the earlier passage quoted in the Katha Upanishad that says that we are looking at the world through the sense organs and assuming its reality because we have no other view. Now, we do have another optional view, but it means learning the discipline of going inward. Instead of looking outward, we start looking inward, and then we discover, I see. It's not like that. So yes, now if we hook this idea into what Sri Ramakrishna is telling us, you see, I think there was an emphasis or a tendency to emphasize the non-dualistic position that everything is nitya and that's all that there is. That is the eternal. Nitya means the eternal. And ignoring the other side of things, the phenomenal aspect of it, which is the waves, called lila. And yes, like a play, it's a play of waves. It's an interplay of all kinds of waves. And the fact that we are deluded by it is part of the play. But the mistake is to say it's a malicious play on me. No, there's only one entity. And so the Bhagavatam is also clear. Krishna is saying, this is my play on myself. Very clearly, he's stating it. So when we have that outlook, there's a wonderful, wonderful transformation in our behavior because we don't take life as seriously as we previously did. What we do take seriously is Shakespeare's understanding expressed. All the world's a stage and we are but players. Now the difference, of course, is when a player plays his part, he or she never misunderstands I am the part being played. There's always something retained, the subconscious retained, I am so-and-so. And this is merely a part. So this analogy also tells us that once we understand that there's a play, and according to the Ashtavakra Samhita, once I understand this play of waves, once I understand that all the phenomenal world is resolved into these subtle elements called tanmatras, immediately, says this Gita Samhita, immediately I find my freedom. My freedom occurs instantaneously because then I have realized once having understood this dimension, this Leela dimension, I also understand the Nitya dimension, the eternal dimension. So therefore, as you quite rightly infer, a great antidote to all the so-called obstacles and difficulties of this world is a thoroughgoing sense of humor. See the fun of it.
It's sort of like a script, you know, that we're conditioned by things, and we have limits. So that's like a script, but you don't get over attached to the script, even though you've got your role to play, because you've got a script.
Yes, you play the game and play it very well. Play it to the best of your ability. Don't sit down and say it's only a game. Let me give up. Let me not play. No, it's a game. Let me play it. Let me play it fully and enjoy it.
But you can't give it up anyway, because you are conditioned. You have a script. You can't escape.
No,
you can't escape that.
But the capacity.
But you're always already situated in a world.
Yeah, but the capacity is there because our nature is free already. The capacity is therefore to discover it and to transcend the two genetic directives, streaming negative entropy on myself and generating, that is, continuing the generation and propagation of the species. These two directives have to be transcended. And this is described, as I previously said, by Sri Ramakrishna as women and gold, see, or lust and greed. These two central things. So they have to be revalued. And it is in this revaluation that we find the method of transcending these two directives. That means we have to embark on discipline. We have to look at things in a different way, revalue things. It's called discrimination, viveka. The discipline is called tapasya, redirecting our energies and strengthening our will of purpose, viveka, discernment, and automatically detachment occurs, vairagya occurs from this. So play the game, yes. And if it wasn't the fact that this whole universe is like that, because in the way is space and time. When we see things through the avenue of space, time, and causation, then we feel embodied and we feel the spatial differences anyway. The group of people earlier, I asked them to do an exercise. Please close your mind. Please be aware of your surroundings. Now close your eyes. Now reproduce them in your imagination. Having seen the rupa, the form, then see what the nama looks like. Okay. Now please remove space. And then after a while, open your eyes. What happened? Could you remove it? No. Because when you remove the space, you remove all the objects with it. The only reason we know there are spatial objects and we have a spatial awareness is because they occupy a certain space that defines them. And it looks as if space is being split. What's the obvious example? You look at a skylight of a city and you see in the distance, let's say toward evening time, and all you see is black shadows. And you take a nice photograph of that and you show it to a child. And the child says, oh yes, the sky was cut with triangles and squares and rectangles. You see, that's the way of looking at it. We all experience that. You're sitting in a train and the train is stationary and another train by the side moves off and you think you're moving. Or you sit in a car wash and the mechanism is coming toward you and you have the sensation, oh, the car is moving forward. No. So that's the way we view things. We've misplaced movement and agency. That's the difficulty. At some point or other, we wake up and say, oh no, There's a kind of delusion or illusion. I'm not moving. Things are moving around me. When I remove the moving components and the spatial components, namely space and time, then things look different. And then I catch the reality. So we have to understand the first principle of it and how compatible modern science is with it. And then we have to see what is the practice of it. And according to what we have just studied, and all the scriptures endorse it, it has to come from somebody who is, the expression is, who is entrenched in Brahman. So that is a competent teacher. And that is generally the necessary component. Scripture is a component for the principles of it. Logic and reasoning is a component. A teacher is a component. And the practice, more than anything else, the practice is a component. We'll leave it there then if there are no other comments or questions. So anyway, I have an announcement to make, and that is our next Enneagram and Essence of Truth that deals with the sense of embodiment called egoism is taking place on the 7th and 8th of July, is part 1. And, sorry, 17th, I beg your pardon, 17th and 18th of July, with the second part on the 7th and 8th of August. So I already have two people registered in that. So those people who haven't done it, it's a good suggestion to do it. And those people who've done it are enthusiastic for others to do it. You need to send me their names and details. All right, we'll leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.